Hi, Greg. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So to start, this is based on a true story, which I always think is fascinating to kind of look at from an actor standpoint, because you do have to either put more work into knowing the person that you're playing, or you still have to approach them as a character. What is kind of your strategy when playing real people?
Well, I actually never met Misha. We shot this movie in COVID, and it was the conditions were pretty rough. Everybody had been in lockdown for a year plus, and movies. I don't. We were way early going back to Vancouver. I literally had to fly up to Seattle and take a rent a car across the border. Uh, and I just remembered that. Yeah, guy was not happy to see me, as it turns out. Over the border, into Vancouver, into a house, locked up for 2 weeks. They didn't. You had to go into quarantine, and then we started shooting. So look, the situation of making this was obviously very difficult and kind of put some limitations on what we could do and who we could talk to. And I actually had we had Dr. Wang on set, which was really useful. He was incredibly forthcoming, and he's a very, very nice, kind guy who would kind of share stories about whatever moment we were in. Um, I felt like part of the job is, of course, creating a relationship, and I'm his friend, basically, and Terry and I had a great kind of hit it off well. I felt like from the get go, but in terms of like really drilling down on what was happening throughout the story, we had the ultimate resource in Ming being available to us.
Yeah, and it's always so interesting too. I'm a millennial. I grew up essentially just watching all of your movies as a kid into an adulthood, and I just keep watching them clearly. But it is so interesting too to look at your filmography, because when I pulled it up before this, I was like, yeah, you've done almost every single genre in some way, shape, or form throughout your career. And I always think that really helps with like stories like this, which are the more inspirational true stories, because you have to look at everything else. And you've also done them before with like Invincible and things like that. What is it about this genre in particular that is really fascinating to kind of like dive into a real human's story and make sure that audiences know it far and wide?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of true life, true stories, I guess, and I don't know. I mean, like, listen, I love fantasy stuff and stuff that's just off of the page completely and has no relevance in any sort of normal world experience. But there is something powerful about true stories, as long as the true story is meaningful or is found a way to tell to an audience. And listen, this is a kind of a through line of a man's life, and Dr. Ming, he didn't cure cancer, of course, but his journey, starting with his time as a young man in China and the Cultural Revolution, and coming to MIT, to the United States with a few dollars in his pocket, working multiple jobs, getting to MIT, ultimately becoming, I think, an important doctor. Um, how you tell that is everything, and how capture that story is ultimately everything to do with the script. And I felt like when I read it, it just it felt honest to me, and it felt inspired. As I say, I was in the middle of COVID, so everything felt inspiring. It wasn't sad, but I really did. I felt like this was a story worth exploring, and I had worked with one of the producers before on another project, and I think I did a Zoom with Dr. Wang, and I just thought, oh wow, this would be really interesting. And listen, I'm just the friend in this. That's all I'm doing, and I'm kind of a cheerleader and a supporter of his, who he said was an important guy in his life. Great, but it's not like I'm doing anything profound. I just champion the story. Haven't I don't feel like there's a lot of Asian American stories out there that cinematically are told. They have been recently had some bit of a resurgence, but historically they've kind of not. And so this was an incredible immigrant story told in a really nice way.
Yeah, which what is a kind of a perfect segue into what I was going to ask for my last question, because you, in my opinion, are like the guy that they get when you're like, you need a really good supporting figure of some point in this. And they're like, all right, well, let's call up Greg Kinnear. He can kill it. Because it's like one of my favorite movies is Sabrina, and I think you killed it in that one. Little Miss Sunshine's the same kind of deal. He's a very supportive dad, but it is really about this girl. And I think in this, he's a very supportive best friend, which Ming clearly had. What do you think it is about those roles that make it so interesting? Because like you are a beloved actor as Greg Kinnear, and it's like we know that like if we see you in one of those roles, like this is gonna really hit. We're all gonna love him. What is it about those roles that I think not only appeals to you, but just is so appealing for an audience as well?
Oh, well, I first of all, thank you. That's very flattering. Uh, you don't have to stop. No,
Pull
no,
up the
that
IMDb and go through all of
no,
them.
that's really nice. I do appreciate it, and I don't think it's um, I don't know. I mean, like I don't even know that it's I don't know. I don't know what what it is that that adds. My thing is I try to take movies that do I have an ensemble quality. I love movies that have have good actors in them and tell. Um, Different kinds of stories. I've been lucky to tell a lot of different kinds of stories, and I felt like this movie is so far off the grid of anything that I've had a chance to even participate in, and my participation was fairly limited up in when we shot it in I think 2021 or 2020. So I was happy to be a part of it, and I don't know, you never know while you're doing it whether or not the um, it's going to resonate, but at the end of the day, I guess you try to follow um, the best stories you can that are told by people who you trust, and I felt like I had a pretty good group with this, and then I close my eyes and I jump.
Well, it really worked with this one, especially. I think people are gonna really like it when they get to see it. And thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a great one.